Hey guys, tonight we drift beneath the swaying arms of live oaks, where thick vines of jasmine wrap around weather-beaten porches, and the night air is heavy with honeysuckle and the sound of cicadas. You're barefoot on red clay soil, the kind that stains your soles and sticks to memory. Somewhere out there, a mourning dove coos under a waxing moon, and the creak of a rocking chair is the only thing louder than your own breathing. But let's not get too dreamy just yet, because you're about to time travel into a world that, for all its charm and storytelling, was built on contradictions so deep they would one day crack the entire nation in half. You're about to meet the gracious hostesses, hear the fiddle music on the veranda, and smell the cornbread cooling in a cast iron skillet. But you'll also hear chains in the distance, and if you're not careful, you might start to see the whole picture. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a gravel path leading to a grand plantation home. The facade is white, framed by fluted columns like a neoclassical temple. There's a porch swing, hanging, motionless. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then silence. This is the Old South, before war rewrote the story. They call it Antebellum, Latin for before the war. But that's just the surface. This world is a paradox, elegant and brutal, genteel and oppressive, fragrant and rotting underneath. The air smells of tobacco, old paper, and lemon verbena. A woman passes you in a silk day dress, her crinoline swishing, cheeks powdered, hair coiled like spun sugar. She smiles, but doesn't see you because you're not really here. You're gliding through a memory, a haunting that's as charming as it is chilling. In 1850, almost 4 million enslaved Black Americans lived in the South. Nearly 90% of them were illiterate, deliberately kept that way by law. But on the surface, meant juleps and magnolia blossoms. Wealthy families built fortunes on human backs, all while debating theology, etiquette, and whether courses should be laced from the front or the back. You walk past a pair of boys playing marbles in the dirt, their draws slow as syrup. One of them has no shoes. You notice he's white poor, but still part of the hierarchy that said some people were born to rule and others to serve. In your ears, a fiddle starts playing. Maybe it's coming from the quarters, maybe from the big house parlor. It's hard to tell. Music was everywhere in this world. Black spirituals, white dance reels, stolen hymns, and reworked chants. If you listen long enough, you'll hear the blending of cultures forced to cohabit, one under duress, the other obliviously on top. Historians still argue whether Southern hospitality was truly sincere or just a veil for social dominance. But right now, someone is offering you sweet tea and a biscuit the size of your hand. You take it, because you're tired, and the porch is cool, and maybe just for now you can pretend this world isn't cracked down the center. Inside the house, the ceilings are high to fight the heat. Ceiling fans the size of wagon wheels turn slowly overhead, lazily shifting air that smells faintly of wood polish and violets. A print of George Washington hangs in the hallway. Always George. Never Abraham. Not here. You sit on a fainting couch because, yes, women fainted, or were expected to, depending on the performance. Corsets were tight, but the rules were tighter. Women smiled and curtsied and were supposed to know just enough to seem clever, but never enough to sound smarter than the men around them. That could ruin your prospects, dear. Out back, someone's picking okra. You can't see them, but you feel them. Hundreds of thousands of enslaved laborers worked land they didn't own, often under watchful eyes from horseback. Whips weren't just tools, they were symbols. And still, resilience bloomed like ironweed through the cracks. Enslaved families held whispered gatherings at night, shared coded songs, practiced Christianity mixed with African traditions, and dreamed of freedom, of escape, of something different than this. One quirky fact: Southern homes often had separate kitchens, disconnected from the main house. Not because of the heat, because open flames and wooden walls don't get along, and kitchen fires were a real risk. And plus, it helped to keep the help out of sight unless needed. Your host hands you a fan, embroidered with lilies and gossip. There's always gossip. Who's marrying whom, who wore what to Sunday church, which planter lost how much on a bad cotton harvest. Cotton was king, sure, but one bad rain, one armyworm infestation, and that kingdom could collapse like a rotten column. As night deepens, the insects grow louder. The trees are alive with them. You step off the porch and walk the edge of a moonlit garden. Gardenias, crepe myrtles, boxwood hedges, all trimmed to perfection. A sign of status. A sign that someone else did the trimming. And there, under a gas lantern, you spot a bust of Calhoun. John Calhoun, the South's favorite firebrand. A man who called slavery a positive good. A man whose ideas would help set the nation on fire. But here, he's a gentleman. Just marble now. Quiet. Unblinking. The sky rolls above you. Stars bright. Moon rising. Humid air sitting heavy on your shoulders. And somewhere inside, a piano starts to play. Maybe Lorena. Maybe Dixie. Maybe something older still. The melody carries out through the night like a dream you're trying to hold on to, but no, you won't. Welcome to the lost world of the Antebellum South. You step onto the porch of the grand plantation house and glance up. Those towering white columns aren't just decorative, they're declarations. They whisper of wealth, class, and power, wrapped in Greek revival symmetry. They're meant to impress visitors, to mimic the temples of ancient democracy, even as the world inside them relied on human bondage. But what they don't show you is the hundreds of hands it took to build them, not from blueprints or paychecks, but from chains, sweat, and silence. You walk through the front door. The air is thick with polish, lavender, pipe smoke, and candle wax. Floors so glossy you could check your teeth in them. And somewhere, a grandfather clock ticks slow and deliberate. The house is quiet now, but you can feel it breathing. Because this house was never just a home. It was a stage, a symbol, a fortress of appearances in a world obsessed with surfaces. Every window was a frame for the story this family told the world, that they were refined, generous, God-fearing, and honorable, that they had tamed nature, built civilization, and earned their comfort. But behind the velvet drapes and imported rugs, every brick was bought with labor that couldn't leave and still can't speak. The family portraits on the wall seem to look down at you, a proud patriarch in a dark coat with a gold pocket watch, his wife in satin, lips unsmiling, chin lifted slightly, their daughter, hair parted precisely, holding a book she may or may not have actually read. They're real. But where's the cook, the wet nurse, the man who laid the cedar floorboard under your feet, or the woman who stitched the lace curtains? Their names don't hang here. Historians still debate how many enslaved workers it took to build and maintain one of these homes. Some say a dozen. Others say several dozen or more, depending on the scale of the household and the wealth of the owner. But they all agree on this. Nearly none of their names made it into the family Bible. You pass by a wooden stair rail polished by years of hands, some invited, some invisible. Every groove in the banister is a fingerprint that tells a story, whether or not anyone was listening. The chandelier overhead isn't just pretty glass. It once held whale oil and now holds gaslight and always holds status. It's been cleaned by hands climbing hidden staircases, reaching in silence, moving quickly. You enter the dining room. The long table stretches out like a runway of control. Silver gleams. China clinks softly as a maid, barefoot, quiet, clears a plate. You weren't supposed to notice her, but you do, because she's part of the machine. She's the one who memorized the favorite dishes of guests who would never learn her name.
These houses were built with slave quarters out of sight, but never out of reach, often a short walk down a dirt path, hidden by hedges or placed near the edge of the fields. There, families lived in one-room shacks with dirt floors and thin walls that couldn't hold heat or privacy, roofs that leaked, doors that creaked, but rarely opened to freedom. One quirky detail is, some plantation homes featured haint blue ceilings on their porches, a soft bluish-green color meant to keep evil spirits or haints away. It was a tradition rooted in West African spiritual beliefs, carried and transformed by enslaved people, then quietly absorbed into Southern superstitions like a ghost story too uncomfortable to name. Upstairs you find the nursery. A doll rests in a crib, tiny shoes beside the bed, but the lullabies here weren't always sung by mothers. They were often sung by women whose own children had been taken, sold, or buried in tiny, unmarked plots beyond the fields. They nursed someone else's baby while mourning their own. You sit on the edge of a bed layered in quilts, every stitch a story. The woman who sewed it may never have been allowed to read or write, but her hands spoke through fabric. Colors from boiled berries, designs passed down orally, symbols woven like prayers. Some say quilts carried coded messages, routes for escape, symbols of safe houses. Historians still argue if that's fact or folklore, but it's beautiful either way. You open a side door and enter what looks like a closet, but it's not. It's the back stair, the one used by servants, narrow, steep, silent, no carpet, no art, just splinters and dust. A reminder that some paths in this house were meant to be hidden, and so were the people who walked them. Back in the kitchen wing, a hearth smolders. Cast iron pots hang heavy on iron hooks. A worn cutting board shows decades of knife marks. This is where real work happened, before the sun rose, after the guests left. Sweat dripping into stew, eyes burning from smoke, lives measured in meals, not years. You pick up a ladle. It's heavier than it looks. Maybe that's the way to memory. Or maybe it's just old iron. Either way, you put it down carefully. The pantry still smells faintly of molasses and dried herbs, glass jars lined like soldiers, flour bins that once held more than grain. They held secrets, like who snuck a biscuit for a hungry child, or which girl was warned not to look the master in the eye again. You step outside into the backyard. The clothesline sags under wet linen. A chicken pecks near the doorstep. And there, not far off, is the well, cold, deep, and dark. Every house had one. Every servant pulled from it. And not just water, sometimes warnings, stories, whispers that traveled faster than telegrams. And then you see it, the tool shed, rusted saws, dented wash tubs, wooden yokes, the machinery of daily life. None of it in the parlor paintings, but all of it vital. The iron hinges, the sugar kettles, the soap molds, tools of a world polished on the outside and brutal underneath. Suddenly, the grandeur of this place feels heavier, like it's sagging under its own denial, because this house wasn't just built by hands you'll never see. It's still standing on silence, and that silence, it echoes louder than the piano in the parlor. You look back at the house one more time. The paint is peeling. The shutters hang crooked. Time is pulling at its seams. The land remembers more than the ledgers ever recorded. The garden grows wild now. Kudzu climbs the stone steps. The wind slips through broken windows. And still, it stands, proud, stubborn, half beautiful, half haunted. This isn't just a house. It's a monument, not to glory, but to memory. And memory doesn't ask your permission to linger.
You're standing in the parlor now. It's quiet, except for the faint hum of a ceiling fan lazily turning and the muffled thump of someone pacing upstairs. The room is a museum of gentility, upholstered fainting couches, a piano that's more often closed than played, a bookshelf filled with volumes meant more for display than reading. And on the tea table, lace doilies, a silver sugar spoon,
and a bowl of candied pecans so sticky they could silence even the most determined gossip. This is where Southern society showed its most refined face. The parlor was sacred. It wasn't where you lived, it's where you performed. Women sat with ankles crossed just so, hands folded in laps, ready to pour tea or deflect a personal question with a practiced laugh. Men bowed, complimented, retreated. Everything meant something. Everything was deliberate. You watch as a lady glides across the room in a hoop skirt so wide it brushes both walls. She lowers herself onto a chair with all the weight of a feather, though truth be told, her corset is doing most of the work. Across from her, a gentleman adjusts his cravat and smiles through teeth stained faintly by tobacco. They're not flirting. They're sparring. Every word they exchange is double-edged, polite on the surface, but sharp beneath. Because in this world, a drawing room wasn't just about manners. It was about maneuvering. Who's marrying whom? Who got caught without gloves? Who paid in coin and who paid in credit? There were reputations to build, to protect, and on occasion to quietly destroy. Some families had a visiting card ritual. If someone called while you were out, they left a stiff printed card. You returned the gesture, or didn't. A missing card could end a friendship. A delayed one could signal scandal. Entire social pecking orders rose and fell by the weight of cardstock and timing. The piano in the corner wasn't just for music, it was a test. Could the daughter play? Was her posture good? Did she know when to stop before her skill looked like showing off? You watch as a young woman carefully selects a sheet of music and plays a gentle waltz. Her fingers know the notes. Her face knows the stakes. And yet, this was the stage where dreams were launched. Marriage matches began here. Business alliances hinted here. War pans, sometimes, whispered here. In the months before secession, many drawing rooms became political salons. Men gathered in low voices to read newspapers out loud, argue over tariffs, and clench cigars between their teeth like they were already soldiers. Historians agree that for the upper class in the Antebellum South, the parlor was as important as the courthouse or the state capitol. It was the place where power dressed itself in charm. But some scholars argue that these performances were acts of desperation as much as dominance, a region clinging to its image while the world crept closer to collapse. You watch as another lady pours coffee into delicate china cups. She offers it with cream, but no sugar today. There's a shortage. You nod politely, but the cup rattles slightly in your hand. Maybe it's the caffeine. Maybe it's the tension you can't quite name. There's a board game on the table, The Mansion of Happiness. It's an old morality game where you race your piece toward virtue, avoiding vices like idleness and pride. You smile. The irony isn't lost on you. Because beneath all this parlor performance lies a brutal truth. It's all built on slavery, on hierarchy, on inherited privilege, and silent suffering. A clock chimes. 4 o'clock. Time for a stroll or maybe just a slow walk through the hallway to show off your new shoes. And shoes, by the way, were a whole conversation. Were they imported? Who made them? Did they squeak? Everything told a story. And the worst crime of all? Trying too hard. You had to seem natural, effortless. A girl who bragged about her needlework? Social suicide. A man who mentioned his income? Utterly vulgar. You were allowed to be excellent, so long as you pretended not to notice. You step into a corner where 2 older women whisper, fans fluttering like butterfly wings. You catch phrases like uncouth, second cousin, and whispers from Charleston. It's a dance of daggers, slow, smiling, and savage. And yet, within this controlled environment, real relationships bloomed. Friends for life, sisters who shared secrets, lovers who passed notes in the fold of a hymn book. Even enslaved house servants, invisible though they were meant to be, learned every gesture, every code. They were the silent archivists of this world, knowing who was lying, who was drinking too much, who had a baby that didn't look quite right. One fringe detail? Some families kept whisper tubes in the walls, primitive intercom systems, so the lady of the house could summon the cook without raising her voice. It's ingenious and unsettling. A whole infrastructure built to preserve the illusion of ease. You leave the parlor and walk past a hallway lined with portraits, generations staring down in pastel oils. Every face framed in confidence, but none showing the weariness of keeping up appearances. You open a cabinet and find calling cards stacked neatly in leather cases. Some names are familiar, others faded. One has a corner missing. Torn in anger, or did it catch on a rough seam as someone stormed out? You'll never know. The parlor is empty now, the piano silent, the tea cooling in untouched cups. But the room hums with memory. This wasn't just a place for social niceties. It was a battlefield dressed in lace. And everyone, from the richest heiress to the quietest butler, knew the rules, even if they never said them out loud. Because in the Antebellum South, power didn't always shout. Sometimes it smiled, crossed its ankles, and poured a second cup.
The bell rings before the sun does. You flinch a little at the sharp clang, deep, metallic, and final. It isn't a school bell or a church bell. It's the plantation bell. And when it rings, it doesn't ask, it commands. Across the humid hush of early morning, it sends a signal that work begins now, whether your body's ready or not. You're outside now, standing in the long grass that's still slick with dew. Mist curls around the trunks of pecan trees and drifts between cabins arranged in a line. You hear murmurs, soft voices, coughs, shuffles of movement. Doors creak open, bare feet press into dirt, and then the sound grows. Footsteps, ladles scraping pots, babies crying. The enslaved are rising. The house behind you is quiet still, curtains drawn. No need for anyone white to be up just yet. Inside, coffee will be brewed, wash basins filled, buttons fastened, but none of that will happen on its own. In the slave quarters, people move like they're part of a practiced ritual. They don't talk much. Most know exactly what's expected before a word is spoken. You trail behind a girl, no older than 14. She's carrying 2 buckets of water, one in each hand. Her arms tremble slightly with the weight. She walks with her head forward, eyes fixed on the ground. She's heading for the main house. She's the chambermaid now. Her mother worked in the kitchen but died last spring. Fever. One boy stirs coals for the cook fire. Another rubs ash into his hands to help him grip the metal plow harness. A woman ties a cloth tightly around her hair and begins feeding a child who's too young for work but old enough to understand silence. The morning doesn't bring rest. It brings survival. And you, a visitor out of time, can only observe. By the time the sky blushes pink, the overseer is mounted on horseback. He rides past the rows of cabins slowly, just once. Everyone sees him. Everyone knows. Today is like yesterday. Unless it isn't, you never know when a punishment to sail or an order to pack and leave might change everything. You walk to the fields, cotton, stretching as far as your eyes can see, low, greenish plants topped with fluffy white bowls, deceptively soft, sharply cruel. A teenage boy stoops to pick, his hands moving fast and careful. Cotton tears the skin. It snags and bites and dries the fingers raw. And there's a quota, always a quota. An older woman nearby hums something low, rhythmic. It's not just for comfort, it's timing. A work song. The others around her pick to its beat. The melody floats through the morning air, sweet and mournful, and then fades back into the rustling of the plants. That song, historians note, might hold coded messages, warnings, escape routes, or even spiritual hope.
But scholars still debate how widespread or organized these codes were. Some say they were survival tools. Others say they were acts of rebellion stitched into melody. The overseer circles back again, whip coiled at his side. He doesn't speak, just watches, and everyone sees him watch. Back at the house, breakfast is being prepared, a silver tray of biscuits and grits, bacon curling in its own grease, coffee thick as syrup. The mistress of the house descends the stairs in a dressing gown. Her hair is curled. Her hands are soft. She doesn't ring a bell. Someone else hears her footsteps and knows it's time. You catch the eyes of the girl serving coffee. She stands with her hands behind her back, head down, face neutral. She isn't a ghost, but in this world, she's treated like one. Always there, never acknowledged. Except when a mistake is made. There's a strange intimacy to this system. House slaves know every detail of their owners' lives, what kind of jam they like, how they sound when they cry, which child wets the bed, and yet they have no legal family of their own, no protection, no safety. It's a cruel paradox, being indispensable and invisible at the same time. After breakfast, the house begins to stir. The master heads to town on business. The wife writes letters or sews. The children are tutored. And for those enslaved inside or outside, it's hours more of labor, washing, tending, hauling, cleaning, making a world run that's built on the premise they're not even people. One detail you won't find in romantic novels, children were sent to the fields too, not always all day, but often, picking up scraps, hauling water, chasing birds from crops. Their games were few, their choices fewer. And then there's Sunday, the so-called day of rest. For some enslaved people, it meant a few hours free from field labor, time to tend their own gardens, fix clothes, or gather in secret prayer readings. The hush arbors, as they were called, were hidden places in the woods. Worship wasn't allowed without white supervision, so they gathered quietly, covering the sound with quilts or leaves, singing softly, whispering scripture. Some say that's where the first true black churches were born, through whisper and weeping in the dark. You linger in that memory a moment, the forest, the hush, the prayers. And then the bell rings again. The sun is higher now, and the heat thickens. The air smells like iron and dust. Somewhere nearby, a whip cracks. Once. You freeze, but no one else flinches. They heard it yesterday. They'll hear it again tomorrow. You want to ask the girl with the water buckets where she finds strength, but you know the answer already. She doesn't find it, she makes it. Every single day. In silence, in shadow, in stubborn endurance. Because in the Antebellum South, the bell didn't just mark time. It reminded everyone who owned it.
You're sitting on the edge of a canopy bed now, watching as a young girl no older than 12 struggles to thread a needle without squinting. She's perched perfectly upright on a velvet cushioned stool, her spine straight, not out of comfort, but out of training. A governess stands nearby, arms crossed, nodding silently every time the girl does something acceptably ladylike. This isn't leisure, this is preparation, because in the Antebellum South, being born a girl in a wealthy family wasn't an escape from responsibility. It just meant your duties came wrapped in satin. The education of a Southern belle didn't happen in a schoolhouse. It happened in parlors, sewing rooms, and drawing rooms. There were tutors, yes, usually for French, piano, and scripture, but the real lessons weren't on paper. They were in posture, tone of voice, the art of saying no while smiling like you meant yes. You learn not to raise your voice, not to interrupt, and above all, never to let your thoughts show on your face. Across the room, her younger brother practices fencing in the hallway. He lunges with exaggerated effort, grunting as if he's already planning to defend his family's honor. Meanwhile, she folds linen napkins and memorizes the names of her future silver patterns. It's a different kind of battle she's being trained for. The girl asks if she may be excused to read. The governess nods, and she retreats to a corner where a tattered book of poetry waits.
probably Byron or Longfellow. But she doesn't open it right away. She just holds it. Maybe she's thinking about the world outside, the one she glimpses from the window. Trees, birds, sky. Maybe she wonders if she'll ever choose who she wants to be. Bells were taught to be graceful, delicate, and pleasing, but don't mistake that for weakness. The best Southern women of the era could manage an entire household, direct dozens of enslaved workers, write letters with layered political meaning, and do it all in gloves without smudging their reputation. Grace in this world was a weapon, just hidden in ribbons and lace. You flip through a family journal nearby. Entries list which young men called on which daughters, who wore which dress to the cotillion, and who fainted in the heat, or pretended to. Fainting, oddly enough, was a whole social cue. Too much excitement, poor health, or perhaps just a convenient way to exit a tense conversation. Scholars still argue how much of this behavior was genuine and how much was performative. Was fragility a real cultural illness or just another method of soft power? You watch the girl's mother enter the room, trailed by a housemaid holding a parasol and a package of fabric swatches. They're planning the ball gown for next month's gathering in Montgomery. The fabric must flatter, but not appear immodest. The neckline daring, but not scandalous. The color can't clash with her complexion. And of course, it must not resemble anything worn by her cousins. That would be a disaster. And God help the girl if her elbows aren't pale enough. Some women, as French documents report, used lemon juice or even crushed pearl dust to whiten their skin. Others avoided the sun like it was disease, because tan skin in this world meant labor, meant field work, meant you were not in your place. Later, you join them in the garden. The air smells like honeysuckle and judgment. A chaperone trails behind like a silent specter, ensuring that no inappropriate moment unfolds. Every glance between boys and girls is observed. Every pause in conversation is evaluated. Marriage wasn't just about love. It was about land, legacy, and maintaining the illusion that everyone knew their place. The girl recites a poem, stumbles on a line, and blushes deeply. Her mother whispers something sharp under her breath because a girl who can't perform in the garden might never make it in the ballroom. And the ballroom, for these families, was destiny. A dance wasn't just a dance. It was coded negotiation. A suitor's choice of partner, his number of waltzes, how closely he bowed, each gesture was weighed. One miscue could ruin a season. Some fathers even rehearsed what questions to ask when a young man came to call. Others hired dance instructors from Europe just to ensure their daughter's posture was beyond reproach. You wander past the stables later and hear laughter. Real laughter. It's the girl again, this time whispering to the stable boy. They're close in age. She tosses him a small peach, and he catches it without smiling too much. For a brief moment, the training slips. She is just a child in the grass. And then the house bell rings, and the world snaps back into place. She runs. He stays. You stay too, thinking about how thin the line was between privilege and prison, even for the pampered. Because no matter how soft the cushions, how sweet the tea, or how large the library, a Southern belle's path was scripted. Debut, marry, manage, obey. And if you were too bold, too bookish, too brown, or too barren, well, your story simply ended early. And yet, not all followed the script. Some read forbidden abolitionist pamphlets. Some taught enslaved children to read, risking prison. Some ran away from arranged marriages. Some stayed and manipulated the system for justice in small, invisible ways. Historians are still uncovering diaries and letters that tell these stories. The ones not written in the family registers, but hidden under floorboards. You return to the room where the girl still holds the poetry book. She opens it now, reads quietly to herself, smiles at something she reads, not because it's romantic, but because for a fleeting moment, it feels like hers. Because in the Antebellum South, being a belle meant knowing how to walk, talk, curtsy, charm, and disappear when necessary. But sometimes they whispered back.
You're standing at the edge of a clearing now. No signs, no fences, just red dirt and tension, cracked by cicadas. A soft breeze rustles the Spanish moss above, and two men, coatless, jaw tight, stand 12 paces apart. Their shadows stretch long across the early morning mist, pistols in hand, glances hard as steel. Neither really wants to be here, and yet, here they are. Because in the Antebellum South, honor demands a toll. And sometimes, that toll is blood. You didn't plan on witnessing a duel today, but here you are. And no, this isn't a Western showdown. This is more ritual than revenge. In fact, the whole affair is oddly formal. A letter was written. A reply was sent. Seconds, professional mediators of ego and etiquette were appointed. Pistol caliber agreed upon. Distance measured. Doctor waiting, nearby, but off to the side, close enough to help, far enough not to interfere with the code. Dueling in the Antebellum South wasn't just a matter of pride. It was practically policy. Southern gentlemen, raised from birth to believe in the supremacy of personal reputation, were bound by an invisible, unwritten law. Never let an insult stand. You insult my word, my wife, my horse, my vote, then we meet with pistols or blades. And if I walk away without defending my honor, well, I may as well hang my head for good. It's ironic, really. For a culture steeped in gospel and grace, nothing screamed righteous manhood like trying to kill someone over a smirk. As you watch the men step into position, it becomes clear. This isn't about the actual offense. It's about perception. Honor wasn't who you were. It was who people said you were. And if your name got smeared, you didn't go to court. You didn't write a letter to the editor. You went to the woods with a second and a pistol, and you made it right. Bang! The gunshot is sharp, but almost anticlimactic. One man staggers, his arm grazed. Not fatal, maybe not even serious. The other lowers his weapon slowly. The duel is over in seconds. The seconds nod. The terms have been satisfied. The wound will scar. The feud will be closed. And tonight they might even raise a glass to each other. Such was the strange etiquette of sanctioned violence. And here's the thing. Dueling was technically illegal in many states. Louisiana, for example, had laws against it by the 1830s. But those laws were often ignored, especially by the elite. Judges and politicians who dueled often returned to work the next day, blood still drying beneath their starched collars. One Louisiana congressman fought 9 duels and won all of them. Another duel between Thomas Benton and Charles Lucas took place on the infamous Bloody Island near St. Louis, a sandbar conveniently outside legal jurisdiction. The South wasn't just permissive of dueling, it was obsessed with it. Southern newspapers published duel announcements. Some plantations had private duel fields. Boys were taught as early as age 10 how to defend themselves with both words and weapons. And military academies like West Point, while officially banning dueling, quietly produced some of the most notorious duelists of the 19th century. You pause beside a stable where a group of teenage boys reenact a famous duel from Savannah. Wooden pistols in hand, mock accents thick as syrup. One falls dramatically to the ground, clutching his chest. His friends laugh, but there's admiration there too. Because in this world, a man who risked his life over a matter of honor was considered heroic, even if the insult was as petty as who danced with whom at last week's soiree. And while men dominated the dueling scene, don't think women were absent from the drama.
You pass a parlor where two Southern ladies sit stiffly across from each other, trading insults in the language of lace. There's a story, one tucked into a side journal from Alabama, about two women who, after a bitter dispute involving a family estate and a poisoned letter, arranged a pistol duel at dawn. One shot the ground deliberately, the other fired into the air. Both claimed victory. Society chalked it up to nerves, but behind closed doors, they were feared. Historians still debate whether these female duels were rare exceptions or just rarely recorded. After all, women in the South were trained in control of their households, their tongues, their husbands. But when pushed, some took up the same tools of justice as the men. One 1850s letter even mentions a petticoat duel, in which the ladies wielded hat pins, not lethal, but pointed, literally and figuratively. As you drift through town, you notice something odd. The same culture that glorifies dueling also thrives on formality, propriety, and public performance. Everyone knows who's feuding with whom. Everyone knows who was slighted at the dinner table or who left the ballroom early. Social survival depended on this constant whisper network. And in a world where face meant everything, even silence could be fatal. But by the 1850s, something starts to shift. As the North industrializes and debates over slavery rage louder, the South's obsession with honor begins to seem archaic to outsiders. Northern papers mock Southern duelists as barbaric relics, and reformers argue that true strength lies not in violence, but in restraint. This stings. It stings so much, in fact, that it fuels the Southern narrative of being misunderstood, misjudged, and maligned, a feeling that would soon ignite much bigger wars than duels ever could. Still, in 1856, a particularly infamous moment reignites the duel debate. Congressman Preston Brooks brutally canes Senator Sumner on the Senate floor. No pistols, no challenge, just raw violence. And applause from much of the South. It's a duel in spirit, if not in form, and it sends a clear message. The code of honor may be evolving, but it's far from dead. You end the day beneath a willow tree near a small family plot. A marble headstone reads, "Fell honorably, 1842. There's no birth date, just that phrase. You wonder what he died defending. A lady's name, a political opinion, or maybe just the last thread of pride he could afford to lose. In the Antebellum South, dueling wasn't just ego. It was a belief system, a way to control narrative, a blood ritual dressed in manners and waistcoats. And sometimes, as the widow sitting nearby will tell you with a bitter smile, it left more than one kind of wound.
You wake up with a fever in your chest and a cough that rattles like a freight train in your lungs. In the modern world, you'd call a doctor, get an antibiotic, and maybe a lecture about rest. But here in the Antebellum South, you're in for a much stranger remedy, part science, part superstition, and fully experimental on your poor, sweating body. First stop, the family medicine chest. Not quite a cabinet, more like a treasure box of horrors. Inside, you'll find bottles of laudanum, castor oil, turpentine, and something labeled Dr. McAllister's Instant Relief Elixir, which smells suspiciously like whiskey and mint. Everything's handwritten, half leaking, and full of mystery. One bottle has directions scrawled in ink. 1 spoonful per hour, or until vision dims. Comforting. Someone calls for Aunt Sally. She's not a doctor, no women are legally, but she's the closest thing you've got to a healer. She bustles in with a rag soaked in vinegar, a poultice made of onions and lard, and a burning belief that fatback rubbed on the chest will draw out any bad spirit in your lungs. You can't argue, you're too weak. She tells you to drink a mixture of molasses, mustard seed, and kerosene. You ask if that's safe. She says, well, your uncle took it and lived. You ask if it cured him. She replies he died of something else. The truth is, medicine in the Antebellum South was both deeply limited and wildly creative. Most towns had no proper doctor, just traveling ones who might be trained or might just have a hat and a horse. Even in big cities like Charleston or New Orleans, hospitals were scarce and often avoided. The rich were treated at home. The poor relied on home remedies or faith. And then there's bleeding. You're not ready for it, but a leech is already on your arm. Aunt Sally mutters something about drawing out the fever. If the leech falls off too early, she slaps on another. If there is no leech, she'll cut your arm with a cleanish razor. You learn quickly that recovery often feels worse than the disease. Historians still argue whether these treatments helped or just delayed the inevitable. Some swear by the herbal traditions passed down through generations: peppermint for stomach pain, slippery elm for sore throats, willow bark for fever. Others point to the appalling mortality rates and argue the real healer was your own immune system, if it held out long enough. And here's where it gets complicated. The enslaved population had its own rich body of medicinal knowledge. Many African Americans brought centuries of medicinal plant wisdom from West Africa and blended it with Native American cures. Enslaved midwives and root doctors were known across plantations, sometimes feared, sometimes revered. You might hear a planter call it voodoo, but he'd still sneak over with his sick child when the white doctor failed. You pass a makeshift herb garden behind a slave cabin. Lavender, yarrow, garlic, and something sharp and bitter you don't recognize. A woman hums as she grinds leaves in a bowl. Her remedies have saved more lives than she can count, but no one will write her name in a journal. Her knowledge lives only in whispers and memory. Meanwhile, in polite society, doctors debate whether humors are real. Yellow bile, black bile, phlegm, blood. Every symptom is traced back to their balance. If you're too cold and wet, you need heat and dryness, hence the mustard plaster, hence the boiled frog skins. And then there's childbirth. You walk into a bedroom dimly lit by candles. A woman labors, her face contorted, her fingers white-knuckling the sheets. No hospitals, no painkillers, just prayers, a midwife, and maybe a splash of whiskey. Mortality from mothers was terrifyingly high, especially in rural areas. And if the baby lived, it still faced a world where cholera, dysentery, and typhoid had no cures. Public health? Barely a concept. There's no sanitation system in most towns. Waste goes in the creek, and the creek is also your water supply. Mosquitoes buzz at every window, delivering yellow fever and malaria like invitations to a funeral. Cities like New Orleans were notorious death traps in summer. Entire families would leave town just to survive the season. You stroll by a pharmacy, well, a general store with shelves of remedies. Bottles boast miraculous cures, opium for babies, cocaine toothache drops, mercury tonics. Coca-Cola won't be invented for another few decades, but if it were, it would probably be sold as a brain stimulant for hysteria. You're not even sure what hysteria is, but apparently every woman over 30 has it. Still, not all was madness. The South has some brilliant minds, especially in surgery. When war would come later, Confederate doctors would perform amputations with shocking speed and precision. Not painlessly, of course, just efficiently. Because in the absence of anesthesia, outside of whiskey and prayer, a fast surgeon was a hero. But today, no one is amputating anything. You're just sick, sweating through linen sheets, watching shadows crawl across the ceiling, praying the leech falls off and that Aunt Sally doesn't come back with the boiled possum bladder tea. Eventually, your fever breaks. You're not sure if it was the molasses kerosene cocktail, the fatback poultice, or simply the will of heaven, but you're alive. You'll even get up tomorrow and say, well, Aunt Sally fixed me, because sometimes belief is the strongest medicine of all. The next morning, you pass a funeral. A small pine box, a white cloth over the top. Someone whispers, he took sick and never woke up. No diagnosis, no certainty, just another mystery for the town's ledger.
In the Antebellum South, illness was part of life, death was never far, and healing was equal parts science, superstition, and blind, beautiful hope.
You step into the sunlight, and it hits like a wall thick, golden, slow. The dust clings to your shoes as you follow a line of Sunday bests moving toward the church at the center of town. It's not just a place of worship, it's the weekly stage for spectacle, status, and salvation. In the Antebellum South, religion isn't confined to quiet pews. It's a full-body, full-society experience, and it's about to pull you in. The church looms white against the dark oaks, its bells still echoing the last call to worship. You duck under the arched doorway and settle onto a creaking wooden bench. All around you, ladies in stiff bonnets fan themselves with folded papers. Gentlemen adjust their waistcoats. Children dangle their feet over the pew edge, already squirming. The air smells of lavender water, dust, and someone's nervous sweat. A soft hum from the organ begins to rise. The preacher enters, young, intense, eyes burning with purpose. His voice rings out not just with scripture, but with urgency. He speaks of sin, yes, but also of order, God's divine hierarchy, of masters and servants, of roles appointed by heaven itself. And somewhere in the back row, or more often up in the balcony, sit rows of enslaved people. Some listen, some endure. Others close their eyes and retreat inward, waiting for the night. Because the true church for them is still to come. As darkness falls, something entirely different unfolds in the woods beyond the plantation. Lanterns are hidden behind coats. Shoes are left behind so no one hears them. And deep among the trees, far from the master's house, voices begin to rise, not with hymns from the white church, but with spirituals born of pain, longing, and coded defiance. You crouch beside them now. There is no pulpit here, no organ, just a circle of men and women, eyes closed, swaying gently. They sing of crossing rivers and walking home, but you understand what they're really saying. They're singing about escape, about heaven as freedom, and about a Moses who might be closer than anyone thinks. Historians still argue whether these hush harbors were more religious or revolutionary, but everyone agrees they were sacred, they were secret, and they were dangerous. One man, known simply as Preacher Moses, whispers a sermon half in code. He quotes the story of Exodus, and his listeners nod because Pharaoh wears a southern accent in this version, and deliverance isn't a far-off hope, it's a whispered plan. Some of the most powerful moments in the history of Black resistance happened not with swords or fists, but with songs beneath trees. And back in town, the divide grows. Southern white churches, especially among Episcopalians and Presbyterians, largely supported the institution of slavery. Many openly. Ministers preached a version of Christianity that aligned with the economic structure around them. Obedience, humility, acceptance of suffering, these were the favorite themes when speaking to enslaved audiences. Some churches even published tracts titled things like Bible Defense of Slavery. Yes, that was a real thing. But others weren't so sure. You pass through a Methodist revival tent later that week, ropes creaking, canvas flapping, sweat dripping from the brows of the weeping. This is the South's other great religious phenomenon, the revival. Fueled by the Second Great Awakening, it turned sleepy faith into roaring fire. Preachers shook their fists, people dropped to their knees in the dirt, women screamed with conviction, and the line between salvation and spectacle blurred. In these tents, at least for a few fleeting moments, race and class sometimes bent. A poor white farmer could pray beside a black woman, an overseer could sob next to a sharecropper. But come Monday morning,
The old lines were painted again, clearer than ever. You stop by the general store and see a local newspaper quoting a preacher who calls abolition an insult to Christian order. A moment later, a woman walks in, humming Swing Low Chariot, hiding the hymn's hidden meaning under its melody. Because in this world, the same Bible could chain you or set you free. You visit a plantation and hear of a woman named Clara, once enslaved, who was known across counties for her healing hands and powerful prayers. Even the master's wife came to her when sick. Clara had never read a Bible, but she could quote the Psalms from memory, passed down from her grandmother in rhythmic chants. When asked where she learned it all, Clara said simply, "The Lord tells me, I just listen." And then there were the missionary efforts, some sincere, some suspicious. Plantation owners often allowed religious education for their enslaved workers, but only in heavily censored form. No mention of liberty or Moses or heaven as a place without chains. They built chapels where white men preached filtered sermons while armed overseers stood at the doors. The goal? Not salvation, but social control. But people still found the cracks. Some black worshipers would pretend to sleep through the official service only to sneak off and sing "Steal Away" as night fell. Others memorized entire chapters of the Bible by hearing it once. Some kept scraps of paper with verses hidden in clothing. Others passed stories like parables disguised as dreams, coded as lullabies. You see now why religion in the Antebellum South was never just religion. It was identity. It was resistance. It was oppression. It was comfort. And often it was all of these things in the same breath. Even among white Southerners, theology became a weapon and a wound. Some truly believed they were God's chosen people defending Eden from outsiders. Others quietly questioned the moral rot beneath the magnolias. A few defected, joining abolitionist movements, publishing fiery pamphlets, or simply slipping away from the life they were born into. You end your Sunday sitting on the edge of a river. The moon is rising. Somewhere across the water, someone is singing, not loudly, but with that same ache you heard in the woods. It's a spiritual, maybe passed down for generations, maybe made up just that night. Either way, it holds everything: pain, hope, fear, faith. In the Antebellum South, religion didn't just shape people's lives, it was life. It baptized babies and blessed lynchings. It consoled the grieving and silenced the guilty. It was the master's tool and the slave's secret weapon. And in every prayer, whether shouted from a pulpit or whispered from a field, there was one deep, unspoken question: which God are we really serving?
You wake to the distant sound of hooves on packed dirt. It's market day, and the town square is already stirring. But your destination isn't the market. No. Today, you're headed toward a different kind of stage. Not one built for applause, but for honor, pride, and occasionally, death. In the Antebellum South, your reputation is more valuable than your land. It's more permanent than your finest silk waistcoat. And if someone questions your courage or tarnishes your name even slightly, it's not something you settle with words. No, you settle it with a duel. You approach the outskirts of town, where a patch of open grassland sits silent and grim. Cypress trees line the field like reluctant witnesses. Two men stand apart, stripped of their coats and watched by their chosen seconds, friends who oversee the event and ensure that everything goes according to the strict code. There's a doctor standing to the side, arms folded. You don't need a preacher here. You need a steady hand, a quick aim, and a willingness to die if necessary. A coin is flipped to determine position.
Pistols are loaded. The men nod in unison. The rules are clear. They'll fire at the count of 10, and only once. Each hopes the other will miss. But if not, God help whoever's slower. 1, 2, 3. You tense. 9, 10. The explosion cracks like thunder. One man stumbles, the other lowers his pistol and exhales. The duel is over in less than a minute, but its consequences will echo for years. You might think this sounds like frontier lawlessness, but that would be a mistake. Dueling in the Antebellum South was governed by an actual playbook, the Code Duello. It came from Ireland, but took root in places like Savannah, Charleston, and New Orleans. And it wasn't anarchy. It was ritual. There were steps to follow. First came the insult, then the letter of challenge, then the appointment of seconds, the choice of weapons, the location, the terms. Everything was wrapped in procedure, because that's what Southern gentlemen believed honor required. And here's the twisted part. If you refused to duel, you could lose your entire social standing. A man who declined a challenge risked being labeled a coward, mocked in newspapers, or even run out of town. For elite Southern men, honor was fragile but sacred. Once broken, no amount of wealth or words could restore it. Only blood could. Mainstream historians agree dueling was most common among the upper classes. Planters, lawyers, editors, judges, officers, even U.S. senators. Jefferson Davis, future president of the Confederacy, once nearly fought a duel over a political disagreement. Andrew Jackson, before becoming president, killed a man in a duel and walked away with a bullet lodged in his chest for the rest of his life. These weren't fringe outbursts. They were public performances of masculinity, backed by society and tradition. But not everyone applauded. By the 1840s and 1850s, a wave of public criticism was rising. Some states began to pass laws banning dueling, particularly if it involved elected officials. Churches condemned it from the pulpit. Mothers wept over sons lost to senseless pride. The Northern press mocked Southern dueling culture as backward, barbaric, and theatrical. Still, it persisted quietly, often illegally, but always defiantly. Historians still argue whether dueling enforced real discipline among elites or simply allowed petty grudges to turn fatal under a veil of honor. You walk down a back alley and pass a tavern where the locals whisper about the Savannah duelist. A man said to have fought over 20 duels and walked away from them all. Some say he sold his soul for good aim. Others say he bribed his seconds to rig the pistols. Either way, his name is legend. You hear tales of more bizarre disputes, too. One duel started because a man accused another of cheating at chess. Another erupted over a disagreement about the correct pronunciation of a Greek philosopher's name. Yes, people literally risked death over how to say Euripides. And while the popular image of the duel involves polished pistols at 20 paces, sometimes it got ugly. Cane fights, Bowie knives, even coffee pot poisonings. Every method had its day. In New Orleans, a notorious case involved 2 men dueling with broadswords on a barge in the Mississippi River. One died. The barge floated away in silence. What's often forgotten is how deeply women were entangled in these affairs, not always as instigators, but certainly as symbols. A veiled glance at a ball, a careless remark about a sister's virtue, even an intercepted love letter could set the whole train in motion. Some women felt flattered, others horrified. and a few, like the infamous Rachel of Mobile, Alabama, were said to have provoked duels deliberately, testing suitors the way a knight might face dragons. One fringe case that still causes debate among scholars involved a rumored duel between two women themselves, disguised as men, fighting over a breach of secret affection. The records are scarce, the details fuzzy, but the legend survives in whispers. Historians still argue whether it happened or not. But in a society obsessed with appearances, who's to say what secrets lay under those layers of lace and honor? The ritual of dueling eventually declined, especially after the Civil War. There was simply too much death, too much blood. The scale of violence that engulfed the nation made even the most dramatic duels seem small and foolish in hindsight. Laws tightened, culture shifted, and the Southern ideal of the gentleman slowly gave way to a new, less performative form of masculinity. But the legacy of the duel lingers. It's there, in the old family cemeteries, where polished stones list dates too close together for comfort. It's in the dusty family letters that mention a tragic misunderstanding no one ever fully explains. It's in the whispered pride of old men who say, "My great-grandfather never backed down from a fight." And if you close your eyes on a still southern morning, you might still hear it. The heavy silence of that field, the slow count, the breath held in thousands of chests. Because here, where honor carried more weight than law, every step was watched, every glance measured, and every word could be your last. You wake to a trembling beneath your feet, not the creak of a loose floorboard or the rumble of wagons. This is different. The bed frame shudders. A porcelain pitcher crashes to the ground. For a heartbeat, the whole house sways as if the earth itself were holding its breath and then releasing it in a groaning exhale. You've just survived one of those rare but unforgettable moments, an earthquake in the South. Now, technically, if we're talking history, the Great Charleston earthquake won't strike until 1886, after the Civil War. But the psychology behind how people in the Antebellum South reacted to such natural events, that was already deeply embedded in the culture, long before the quake ever hit. Because in this world, every shift in nature is more than just geology. It's a sign. In the South, particularly among rural communities and those tied to old traditions, whether enslaved, free, planter, or preacher, earthquakes, eclipses, sudden animal behavior, comets, failed crops, and streaks of lightning weren't just natural phenomena. They were warnings. They were sermons written across the sky. The soil could speak if you listened. After the earth settles, the stories begin. One woman claims she saw the portrait of her dead husband fall from the wall seconds before the shaking began. Another insists her cat bolted under the porch hours earlier and refused to come out. A third whispers that she saw the face of an angel. No, a grim angel hovering near the cemetery just last night. This kind of storytelling isn't new. It's how the South processes fear, not through raw facts or newspaper bulletins, but through meaning, through symbols. You can't just explain away a quake. You have to interpret it. And interpretation, down here, often begins in the pulpit. You walk into a Baptist church the next morning. The building is still intact, but you can feel the tension humming in the air like a tuning fork. The preacher wastes no time. He stands tall, palms open, eyes flashing. "Brothers and sisters," he thunders, "the Lord is shaking this land to wake us up." He quotes Amos, "Shall a trumpet be blown in the city, and the people not be afraid?" He connects the quake to the sins of the people: drunkenness, pride, slavery, Sabbath breaking, you name it. God is watching, he warns, and he's not happy. But here's where it gets interesting. The same quake, the same tremble in the earth, might be preached completely differently just a few miles down the road. Another preacher might say it's a test of faith, a sign of coming glory, proof that God is with the South, not against it. That this region, with its grand plantations, chivalric codes, and moral superiority, is being refined like gold in the fire. This duality runs deep. Historians still debate whether natural disasters in the Antebellum South pushed people towards spiritual humility or hardened their certainty that they were chosen. Because one thing's for sure, no one shrugged and said, "Well, that was weird." Nope. Everyone reached for an explanation. And not just the white elite. Among enslaved communities, the quake, or any natural disturbance, had its own layers of meaning. Some saw it as a sign that deliverance was near. Others whispered about the spirits beneath the soil growing restless. Some interpreted it through the lens of African cosmology, still clinging on through generations, where ancestors could speak through wind, trees, birds, or, yes, earthquakes. This is where things get truly layered. You've got formal Christianity being preached on Sundays, and behind it, beneath it, running like a hidden stream, you've got old world beliefs, West African, Caribbean, Appalachian, that shape how people feel about death, nature, justice. A crack in the ceiling might be read as a sign from an angry ancestor. A tree split by lightning might signal it's time to bury something secret beneath the roots to ward off future harm. And let's not forget the Southern folklore experts, your local wise women, herb gatherers, midwives. These weren't always formal witches, but their knowledge went deeper than scripture. They told you to watch how birds flew before a storm. They'd say if the chickens roosted early, trouble was coming. And when the ground shook, you'd best not ignore it. Something big was about to change. One of the most eerie and persistent superstitions, that a thunderstorm during a funeral meant the soul hadn't passed on peacefully. So imagine what an earthquake during a sermon meant to a devout community. A whole city might fast. A plantation owner might vow to release an enslaved family. A marriage might be rushed or a confession made. The quake moves more than bricks. It stirs the spirit. And that brings us back to Charleston. In 1886, when the real quake hit, it struck with a force that stunned everyone. Over 100 lives lost, thousands of buildings damaged or destroyed, brick churches cracked wide open, streets split. And even then, long after the war, the old reflexes remained. People fell to their knees. Newspapers printed scripture on the front page. Some said it was God's judgment for the horrors of slavery. Others claimed it was punishment for abolishing slavery. The South remained torn, morally, spiritually, physically. And here's the thing. Even the U.S. Geological Survey had no real tools back then to explain why the Earth had convulsed. No fault line had been known to run through Charleston, no previous patterns. So nature, once again, pointed beyond itself. It demanded interpretation. You walk through the aftermath. A cross is bent on a rooftop. A boy holds a Bible in one hand and a cracked doll in the other. A woman kneels in the rubble, whispering prayers in both English and Gullah. Everyone's waiting for the next tremor, not just of earth, but of truth, of reckoning. And even now, decades earlier in your time-warped antebellum dream, you feel the foreshocks in your bones. The South is uneasy. It senses something coming, not just in the soil, but in the politics, in the enslaved songs, in the weather that grows wilder by the year. A reckoning waits not just beneath the ground, but beneath the surface of a culture in denial. So you pour water into a cracked glass, watch it ripple, and ask yourself, what will finally shatter first? This glass? The ground? Or the myth that everything here was ever built to last?
You ride slowly down a dusty road where shadows stretch long across cotton fields, the air heavy with heat and expectation. In the distance, a columned church steeple rises above the tree line. Sunday is coming. And in the Antebellum South, Sunday isn't just a day, it's a rhythm, a ritual, a world all its own. Here, religion is the heartbeat of society, not just personal faith, but social order, economic justification, and a grand moral pageant. Churches don't merely reflect the community, they shape it. Every planter, merchant, and enslaved laborer lives under the watchful eye of the church. Yet, what they each hear beneath that same roof can be vastly different. You arrive just in time to hear the bell ring, soft and resonant. It doesn't matter if you're in a rural Georgia parish or a thriving New Orleans cathedral. That bell means the same thing. The Lord's day has begun. You step inside. The white pews are full. The air smells like pine wood and starch. Plantation families sit up front in carefully assigned spots, the men stiff in waistcoats, the women like painted porcelain in bonnets and lace. Behind them, in a wooden gallery or outside under trees, stand the enslaved, the very people whose labor built the church itself. The sermon begins. The preacher's voice is slow, authoritative, and unmistakably Southern. His words blend Bible and cotton, salvation and submission. He thunders about obedience, quoting Ephesians, "Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters." It's not just theology, it's policy. This is one of the most unsettling realities of antebellum religion. The Bible is used as a tool to justify slavery. From Genesis to Paul, verses are cherry-picked to stitch together a theological safety net for an entire economy of bondage. Historians still argue how many ministers truly believed it and how many just knew what their patrons expected to hear. Either way, the result is the same. Slavery is wrapped in sacred language, shielded by Scripture. But you notice something strange. As the sermon continues, the enslaved don't look defeated. Many stare with narrowed eyes, lips barely moving in silent repetition, not of the preacher's words, but of something older, deeper. Because when formal church ends, another church begins. You follow the path past the graveyard, through a thicket, down to a clearing beside a stream. And there, under the dark canopy of trees, you find the hush harbor. No bells here, no pews, no steeple, just voices low, rhythmic, rising like smoke. This is where enslaved people hold secret worship, away from their master's control. It's not rebellion, it's refuge. In the hush harbor, songs turn into prayers and prayers into resistance. You hear a spiritual rise, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. It sounds like faith, but also code. Escape is near.
Hope is alive. Deliverance is more than spiritual. It's possible. One woman recites Exodus like she's lived it herself. Another testifies about a dream where chains melted in the sun. A child claps in rhythm, not fully understanding, but feeling the power in the beat. This isn't Christianity as control. It's Christianity as liberation. And yet, the theology is still richly biblical. Moses, Daniel, Jesus, Paul. These aren't just holy men. They're survivors, suffering servants, chain breakers. Their stories aren't allegories. They're templates. You feel it in every whispered amen. The enslaved are not passive recipients of a forced faith. They are active theologians of survival. But back at the main church, another theology is taking shape. The South is amid a religious transformation, the Second Great Awakening. Tent revivals sweep across the countryside, fiery sermons, emotional conversions, and a surge of Baptist and Methodist congregations reshape Southern Protestantism. It's rowdy, it's public, and it's everywhere. You visit a revival on the edge of town. There are torches stuck in the dirt, preachers screaming into the night, and dozens falling to their knees. "I've been saved," one man cries, holding his hat to the sky. It's dramatic, messy, even a little terrifying. But it's also democratizing. In these revivals, it doesn't matter if you're poor or powerful. What matters is how loudly you weep, how sincerely you repent. The spiritual playing field is leveled, temporarily at least. Some formerly enslaved people even preach. Others are baptized in full view of their masters. It's a strange paradox. Revivalism sometimes feeds the hierarchy, but it also occasionally undermines it. Still, not everyone trusts this wave of emotion. Some Episcopal elites frown at the shouting, the shaking, the spiritual excess. To them, religion should be dignified, another expression of gentility. A good Christian doesn't flail on the ground. He hosts tea after service. And then there's Catholicism. You slip quietly into a New Orleans sanctuary. Incense hangs heavy in the air. Candles flicker against stone. Latin echoes off marble. It feels like another world. But even here, the divisions hold. White Creoles and enslaved Haitians may kneel before the same cross, but their paths to salvation are not paved equally. You begin to notice the split. Southern religion in the antebellum era is two-faced. It offers comfort and control. It saves souls and reinforces chains. It promises heaven while keeping many in hell on earth. And yet, in the contradictions, people still find meaning. A white widow clutches her Bible to grieve her lost son. A black mother hums "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot" as she nurses her child. A preacher lays hands on a boy whose future is uncertain. All of them are reaching for something higher. Because no matter who you are in this world, you're going to die. And in the Antebellum South, where death rides beside every fever, childbirth, and slave patrol, faith becomes the rope people hold. You feel it now as you leave the hush harbor behind. The trees sway gently overhead, like the breath of the divine moving through the branches. A lone voice sings behind you, soft and slow. There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. And for a moment, you believe it.
You lean back on a weathered bench beneath a creaking porch, a battered copy of the Mobile Register rustling in your lap. It's mid-afternoon, and the air is thick with humidity, and thicker still with opinions. Because in the Antebellum South, politics isn't just a parlor topic,
It's blood sport. You don't casually talk politics here. You live it. You declare it with every stance you take, every newspaper you read, every cotton bale you count. And right now, as the 1850s heat up, you can feel it. The tension, the weight of decisions rolling in like thunderclouds on a plantation horizon. A man beside you slaps down a copy of the Richmond Inquirer and scoffs. Those abolitionists up north don't know what they're stirring. Another murmurs, they know exactly. This isn't just regional disagreement, it's a gathering storm. The South is defending not only its economy, but what it calls its way of life. And the pressure cooker is whistling. You step into the dining room of a wealthy planter. On the wall, portraits of founding fathers. Over the fireplace, a sword from the War of 1812. And at the head of the table, your host, Colonel H, in a white waistcoat, quoting Calhoun as if the man had just dined with him. The political ideology here is soaked in honor, agrarianism, and a deep suspicion of federal power. States' rights aren't just theory, they're doctrine. The federal government? A nosy neighbor. The North? An arrogant in-law who doesn't understand the household. You hear phrases like Southern sovereignty and constitutional liberty tossed around like confetti. But underneath all the noble-sounding rhetoric lies the unspoken truth. The Southern economy is built on slavery, and politics is how it stays that way. Still, the South doesn't speak with one voice. Far from it. In Charleston, you meet fire eaters, radicals who openly advocate for secession. They speak in thunderous tones, with chins lifted like marble busts. If they elect another Northern president, we walk. No hesitation. These are the men who will fan the flames of disunion. Their speeches? Half prophecy, half provocation. But ride west into the hill country of Tennessee, and the mood shifts. Here, poor white farmers have no slaves. Some distrust planters more than Yankees. They mutter about tariffs, yes, but they also question why they should die defending the wealth of men who live in mansions and ride to church in carriages. Historians still debate how deeply these class divisions influenced Southern resistance or compliance when war finally came. And let's not forget the voices you don't hear on the front porch. An enslaved man listens quietly behind the door, absorbing every argument, every declaration of war. He knows that no matter how the lines are drawn, his name won't be on the ballot, but his future will be decided just the same. Or consider a white woman at the sewing circle threading letters into a quilt. She doesn't vote, she doesn't hold office, but she shapes opinion, manages the household economy, and writes the letters that shift men's hearts at war. Her politics are quiet, but not absent. You flip to the editorial page. One article defends the Compromise of 1850, another calls it betrayal. A cartoon mocks abolitionists as meddlers. Another warns of Negro domination if slavery ends. Fear is a campaign tactic. So is pride. And always a simmering paranoia that the Southern way of life is under siege. A fringe column quotes a visiting European thinker who claims slavery as a benign institution that elevates Africans. You choke on your sweet tea, but in drawing rooms and colleges, pseudoscience and theology are fused to build a defensive wall around slavery that pretends to be noble. And still, politics has its peculiar quirks. Election day in the South? It's a party. Barbecue, whiskey, handshakes. No secret ballots. Voting is public, loud, performative. You watch one man vote while balancing a jug of corn liquor. Another waves a hat and declares he's voted for the only man with guts in the county. It's chaotic. It's corrupt. It's very, very Southern. And you hear stories of coffin-handled Bowie knives brought to the polls just in case someone gets too passionate about tariffs or treaties. And duels? Oh, yes. Disagreements over a political slight can lead to dawn meetings by the river. One historian notes that antebellum political culture was equal parts Aristotle and apocalyptic brawl. And brawls aren't always metaphorical. You remember that time in Congress when Representative Preston Brooks, a South Carolina Democrat, caned Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts on the Senate floor. Why? Because Sumner dared insult a pro-slavery relative. Brooks became a Southern folk hero. Sumner took 3 years to recover. This somehow was seen as chivalry. The South is obsessed with its image. Gallant, principled, misunderstood. But beneath that smooth-talking drawl is a ruthless political machine. Delegations are whipped into line. Newspapers are muzzled. Opponents are silenced or shamed. In public debates, it's less about reason and more about posture, honor, always honor. And in the private clubs, in the twilight hours, men whisper of something unthinkable. What if we leave, they ask. Not just rhetorically, not just in frustration, but seriously. What if the South secedes? You see the writing on the wall. The crisis over the Missouri Compromise, the battle over Kansas, the fiery debates surrounding Dred Scott, and now murmurs about Lincoln, a man Southerners barely know but already despise. Still, some voices urge caution. They warn of war, of blood, of economic collapse. But they're quieter, and often they're shouted down. Because in the end, Southern politics isn't just about policy. It's about identity. It's about power. It's about who gets to decide who counts. And the South, facing modernity, industrialism, and growing abolitionist fire, is circling its wagons. You watch the sun set behind that old courthouse. The American flag still flutters above it, but for how long? One day soon, someone will lower it, fold it, and raise another. You wake to the sound of gravel crunching under hooves. There's a letter on the table, sealed with thick red wax. You recognize the handwriting. It's your cousin from Charleston. The words spill out heavy. Secession is no longer a whisper. It's thunder now. You sit down slowly, the air in the room thick. You felt this coming. Everyone has. The election of Abraham Lincoln felt like a trigger, but in truth, the fuse was laid years ago. Tariffs, fugitive slave laws, John Brown's raid, bleeding Kansas. Bit by bit, the idea of union has frayed like a worn hymn. Now, in the wake of Lincoln's victory, the Southern elite speak openly of honor, sovereignty, and the inalienable right to preserve their way of life. Historians still debate whether this movement was about states' rights or slavery, or if the two were ever truly separable. You step outside. The air smells like burning pine and uncertainty. A neighbor rides past with a rifle strapped across his saddle. In the town square, a crowd gathers around a platform. A speaker's voice bellows. South Carolina leads the charge. And indeed it does, seceding in December 1860, the first domino to fall. Over the next few months, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas follow. It's like watching a dam break in slow motion. You pass a general store where cotton bales lean against the walls. The South still believes in King Cotton, the grand delusion that Britain and France will be forced to intervene. After all, their textile empires depend on Southern exports. But some merchants whisper otherwise. The world's bigger than we think, one mutters. India's got cotton too. You think of those words long after you walk away. Not everyone is thrilled. In the mountain counties of eastern Tennessee and western Virginia, resentment simmers. Poor white farmers ask why they should go to war to protect the wealth of the planter class. A rich man's war and a poor man's fight, they grumble. Their homes have no slaves, no sugar, no grand halls, just fields, cabins, and hard labor. A few local papers print protests, but louder voices drown them out. You wander into a printing shop. Fresh pamphlets are laid out like weapons. Titles scream, "The Southern cause is sacred," "Lincoln the tyrant," "Stand for liberty." The Southern spin machine is up and running. Words become cannonballs. Public speeches become rallies. Children wave newly sewn flags with 7 stars. Soon, there will be 11. Meanwhile, Montgomery, Alabama becomes the new seat of power. Delegates meet and draw up a constitution for the Confederate States of America. It's almost identical to the U.S. version, except for one glaring difference. It explicitly protects slavery. The mask slips. Euphemisms fall away. Slavery is no longer the thing Southerners claim to regret but tolerate. It's enshrined, celebrated. Even God is drafted into the text, invoked as the giver of this natural order. In churches across the South, preachers deliver sermons that twist scripture into sanction. One Baptist minister proclaims, "The Lord created bondsmen and masters, each to their role." But behind closed doors, not all are convinced. A Methodist in Georgia, voice low, asks you after service, "How long can we pretend righteousness covers profit?" You have no answer. Preparations move quickly. Town halls become recruitment centers. Local militias drill on every green field. Women begin sewing gray uniforms by lamplight. Blacksmiths forge new horseshoes than cannons. Cotton warehouses double as armories. Children play soldier in the dirt, mimicking drills they've seen in town squares. You receive another letter, this time from an aunt in Louisiana. Her son, just 17, has lied about his age and enlisted. He was proud, she writes, but he left his boots on the wrong feet. You fold the paper gently, reminded that behind every flag is a trembling mother. And then it comes. April 1861, Fort Sumter. Confederate forces bombard the Union fort in Charleston Harbor. The sky glows orange with cannon flash. No one dies during the bombardment, but something else does. Hope of peace. Lincoln responds with a call for 75,000 volunteers. The North begins to mobilize, and the final 4 slave states, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee, are pulled into the Confederate orbit. Now there are 11. You walk the dirt road between towns and see flags nailed to trees, slogans painted across barns, victory or death, liberty first. The bravado is thick, but so is the fear. Southern cities don't have the infrastructure for modern war. Rail lines are patchy. Manufacturing is minimal. The Confederacy has horses, pride, and raw materials, but not much else. Still, spirits soar. Southern men believe one rebel is worth 5 Yankees. They believe in the justness of their cause. They believe God is with them. They believe it'll all be over by Christmas. You visit a plantation outside Savannah. The master gathers his family under the portico and gives a speech. "If we do not fight now, we surrender forever." He's never held a rifle in his life, but he's already written to Jefferson Davis offering funds. His daughter weeps. His enslaved servants say nothing. Yet, behind the silence, movements stir. Word spread among the enslaved. War may bring freedom. Some plan to flee at the first cannon blast. Others pray cautiously, prayers that don't appear in any Confederate newspaper. In the swamps, hush harbors hold quiet revivals. The enslaved sing spirituals with double meanings. Freedom, yes, but not just in heaven. One night, you listen from a distance as a song rises on the wind. Steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. You wonder how much longer they'll have to wait. You ride into Richmond, soon to be the new capital. Horses strain under cannon weight. Men bark orders. A child drops a biscuit in the mud. The city smells of sweat, tar, and apprehension. You can feel it in your ribs. The South is moving, but no one knows where the road ends. And before sleep takes you, you sit beneath a magnolia tree and stare into the twilight. Somewhere across the river, the Union prepares too. The air hums. The war is no longer a concept. It's coming. It's here. And the Old South, ornate, elegant, built on 1,000 contradictions, is stepping into the fire.
You wake up to the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing across the plantation fields. It's not a new sound, but it feels different now. It's no longer just for horseshoes and hinges. It's the sound of war preparation, cannon molds, musket barrels, wagon reinforcements. The entire South is retooling itself, and you're standing in the middle of its transformation.
The Confederate dream of a swift victory has evaporated. This isn't a skirmish, it's a full-scale war, and the South is beginning to grasp the weight of that reality. By the winter of 1861, a sense of urgency replaces the parades and pageantry. There's less cheering in the streets and more quiet conversations behind closed doors. Southern cities begin to shift their identities. Cotton warehouses become makeshift hospitals. Courthouses double as draft offices. Church bells that once tolled for weddings now signal funerals. You walk through the streets of Richmond, now the Confederate capital. The city buzzes with activity, but it's not the hopeful kind. The streets are clogged with carts, volunteers, and nervous families. Hospitals are being organized in hotels and churches. Women are sewing flags and bandages in the same rooms. The city is filling up. Refugees from border areas, politicians, families following their enlisted sons. Tents spill into alleyways, and the smell of sweat, gunpowder, and spoiled food floats in the air. The Confederate leadership scrambles to keep order. Jefferson Davis, the newly appointed president, walks a tightrope of military management and political persuasion. You hear people murmur about him. Some say he's too rigid, too obsessed with hierarchy. Others call him the Moses of the South. Historians still debate whether he was the right man for a cause that demanded both charisma and ruthlessness. Down the road in the rural counties, life grows leaner. The blockade is beginning to squeeze. Imported goods dwindle. Coffee becomes a luxury. Salt is hoarded. A plantation mistress learns how to dye her own thread and render soap from ash. You walk past her garden and see corn growing where roses used to bloom. The enslaved population senses the shifting tides. Rumors swirl. Some speak of Lincoln's army coming to liberate. Others remain wary. You pass a kitchen where a woman stirs stew and softly sings, "Let my people go." It's not subtle. It's not meant to be. Meanwhile, Southern industry struggles to rise to the challenge. The Tredegar Iron Works in Richmond is the pride of the Confederacy, churning out artillery and rail supplies. But there aren't enough factories to match the North. What exists is scattered, small, under-resourced, often isolated by Union blockades. The South's economy, built on agriculture and enslaved labor, simply wasn't designed for total war. So communities improvise. Women tear bed sheets into bandages, boys under 15 are trained for home guard duty, churches organize donation drives for boots and blankets. In a Louisiana village, you watch as a preacher blesses crates of homemade bullets stacked beside the altar. The pews are half empty. Most of the men are already gone. Even the mail changes. Letters arrive with wax seals broken, pages tear-stained and smudged. You open one from a cousin at the front lines. The food's cold, the boots don't fit, but the fire in our hearts keeps us marching. You fold it carefully, knowing he's trying to sound brave. He's 17. You visit a railroad junction in Georgia. Trains screech through at odd hours loaded with crates labeled rations, ammunition, and coffins. The railways, which had once been a novelty, are now the veins of the war. Still, the system is flawed. Southern lines are mismatched, many built with incompatible gauges. You witness men physically lifting train cars from one track to another. It's a slow, sweaty ballet that costs time and lives. And then there's the inflation. You walk into a market in Atlanta and see a loaf of bread selling for 15 Confederate dollars. By the time you reach the butcher's stall, the price has changed. Money is losing its value faster than people can spend it. Planters who once lived like kings now haggle for salt pork. The wealthy buy up gold and hide it under floorboards. The poor do what they've always done: survive, somehow. One woman trades her wedding ring for a bag of flour. Another swaps her piano for medicine. And still in every town, the Confederate flag flies proudly, sewn by hands now blistered, held by men now limping. The Southern press tries to maintain morale. Headlines still scream, "Victory at Bull Run! The Yankees retreat again!" But under the surface, cracks are forming. Privately, some editors admit the Union is better supplied, better trained, and gaining momentum. Still, dissent is dangerous. In North Carolina, a man is dragged from his porch for criticizing the war. In Mississippi, a preacher is warned after preaching peace too passionately. You begin to feel it in the air, a tightening, a desperation. Not all Southerners believe the war is winnable anymore, but pride keeps them from saying it aloud. Instead, they say, "We have to finish what we started." They say, "We can't let our boys die for nothing." The grief becomes a kind of fuel. The funerals become rehearsed. Black creep adorns doors like seasonal decoration. And you still walk. You walk past empty classrooms where teachers now instruct only the very young and the very old. You walk past churches holding prayer vigils every Thursday for our brave sons. You walk through fields being worked by women and children, overseen by overseers stretched too thin. The pace slows, the hands multiply, but the yield shrinks. At night, you stop beneath a cypress tree and hear wolves howling. Or maybe they're just distant dogs. You're not sure anymore. You sleep lighter. Everyone does. The South, once cloaked in magnolia and myth, is now blanketed in dust, smoke, and hope that flickers like a candle in the wind.
You're walking a narrow road through scorched fields, the sky the color of rust. The South is no longer just fighting the Union, it's fighting hunger, disease, and exhaustion. The war machine grinds slower now, and every rotation costs more. You pass by an old plantation house, its white columns cracked, windows shattered. What used to be the stage of summer balls and elegant luncheons now houses a field hospital. Inside, groaning men lie shoulder to shoulder on floors stained darker than the wood beneath. This isn't the South from 2 years ago. This is a nation unraveling under its own ideals. You hear the words Gettysburg whispered like a curse. That July, 1863, the dreams of Confederate expansion into the North were crushed under 3 days of slaughter. Historians still argue whether that was the turning point, but down here, in the fields of Georgia and the swamps of Louisiana, it felt like it. The momentum shifted, the air changed. A quiet dread started to settle in, like mold in the walls of an old house. You keep walking. In a small town near Vicksburg, you see women scraping together acorn flour for biscuits. A teenage boy with no shoes guards a bridge with a broken musket. Everything is threadbare now. Clothes, morale, defenses, even faith seems thinner in the air, like a hymn sung half-heartedly in a cold chapel. Confederate money is practically wallpaper. Inflation has run so wild that a pound of bacon might cost $50 if you can find it. People swap buttons and tobacco, or trade favors in place of cash. A woman offers piano lessons for a sack of meal. A widow sells her family Bible to buy a spool of thread. But even as the fabric frays, the Confederacy refuses to fold. In Richmond, Jefferson Davis clings to the idea of eventual victory, delivering speeches laced with fire and scripture. But the crowds are smaller now and wearier. You stand in the back of one and notice how many soldiers are missing an arm, or a leg, or both.
Their eyes say what their mouths won't. Somewhere in Georgia, General Sherman is on the move. His march to the sea becomes legend as it happens. Fields burned, railroads torn, plantations turned into smoking ruins. You pass by one and see initials carved into the charred doorway, a child's toy half melted in the mud, nothing left but the scent of sulphur and loss. Not everyone blames the Union. Some whisper that the South's pride was its downfall, that it should have compromised, found peace, reformed. But those voices are still quiet. Louder are the calls for vengeance, for holding the line, for honoring the dead. Even as defeat draws closer, the myth of Southern righteousness deepens. You spend a night in a town where the church holds a day of fasting and humiliation. It's not just hunger anymore, it's repentance. A preacher shouts about divine judgment. "This war is our purging," he says, sweat pouring from his brow. "We are being refined by fire." You glance around and see old women nodding, young ones crying, children silent, unsure why the grown-ups look so afraid. The enslaved are watching too, more openly now. Some flee behind Union lines where freedom is promised. Others wait, working under the watchful eyes of masters who no longer have the means to punish as they once did. There's a quiet shift in power, like a tide rolling beneath the surface. You see it in the way a man lingers too long while chopping wood, in the tone of a prayer muttered just a little too loud. By 1864, Confederate conscription laws are scraping the bottom of the barrel. 17-year-olds and 50-year-olds alike are called to fight. Desertion skyrockets. You see a boy hanged in a pine grove, a sign tied around his neck, "Traitor." He couldn't have been more than 15. You avert your gaze, but the image won't leave you. In towns across the South, food riots erupt, mostly led by women. In Richmond, you watch a crowd storm a bakery, shouting bread or blood. They're not saboteurs. They're mothers, sisters, widows, survivors. The war has taken their sons, their husbands, and now their meals. You meet a school teacher who now uses her classroom to sew uniforms. She teaches spelling with words like siege, ration, and sacrifice. The children learn quietly, their eyes older than their years. One boy tells you his father is a hero. Another says his father was a coward for running. You don't know which hurts more. And still, the stories persist. Men in grey uniforms tell each other tales of Yankee cowardice and divine justice. Women gather to read letters aloud, pretending not to notice when a name doesn't appear. Songs are sung slower now, more mournful. The bonny blue flag is still played, but it feels more like memory than anthem. You reach a crossroads outside Atlanta and meet a soldier missing 2 fingers. He offers you a drink from a flask. "We're losing," he says, not bitter but hollow. "But we won't stop." His horse is skin and bone, his boots are patched with wire, his Bible is worn at the edges. He tips his hat and rides on. And as the sun dips below the horizon, you sit on a crate of dried apples and look out over a dying land. Not dead yet, but dying. The fire of rebellion is now embers, and the South, once so sure of its destiny, is staring into a future it can no longer control. You wake to a sky so still it doesn't feel real. The air has changed again. Less smoke, more silence. You can almost feel the South holding its breath. Word has spread. Richmond has fallen. Lee has surrendered at Appomattox. The war is over. But it doesn't feel over. Not in the way movies might one day show it. You walk the streets and see men wandering without uniforms, their boots worn through, rifles slung not for battle, but for barter. Some weep in corners, others stare blankly. The battlefields are quiet, yes, but the wounds still scream. You pass a plantation that once glittered with wealth. Its fields lie fallow, its columns blackened by fire. Inside, the parlor is stripped bare. The piano has been traded for flour. The chandelier, gone. And seated on a cracked velvet chair is the mistress of the house, staring out a broken window like she's waiting for the past to return. But it won't. You walk into a church where the bell hasn't rung in months. The pews are splintered, the pulpit used for kindling, but a woman kneels at the altar anyway, hands clasped. She doesn't pray for victory. She prays for understanding. The Confederacy is no more, but its ghost walks beside you. It lingers in every burned barn, every torn flag, every fatherless child. Historians still argue whether it ever truly believed it could win or whether pride carried it further than it should have gone. What's clear now is that the dream is over and reality has come to collect. You pass groups of newly freed Black men and women, some jubilant, some wary. A few still wear the clothes they worked in yesterday. One man carries a Bible under his arm and walks with a strange mix of dignity and disbelief. He tells you, "I'm looking for my wife. She was sold to Mississippi." He's been walking east for 3 days. He doesn't stop to rest, just walks. Freedmen's bureaus spring up in battered courthouses. You peek inside one and see rows of people waiting for food, for papers, for something resembling a future. A white soldier sits behind a desk, head in hands. He's trying to explain freedom to a mother who only wants to know where her children were taken. You stop in a schoolhouse where a young Black teacher stands before a chalkboard. The students sit barefoot, eyes wide. She writes a word in large block letters. Hope. Some have never held a pencil. Others write their names slowly, savoring each letter like a hymn. Meanwhile, the old elite tries to rebuild, but their world is gone. You overhear a former planter say, "We must preserve our way of life." But he says it with less fire now, more confusion. His mansion was shelled. His sons are buried. His slaves are gone. He owns only what he can carry, which turns out to be less than he thought. You stop by a camp of Confederate veterans. They drink from tin mugs and talk about Chickamauga like it happened yesterday. But when one says, "Maybe we were wrong," the others go quiet. Then someone sings Dixie and they all join in, not with pride, but with memory. Carpetbaggers arrive, northerners seeking opportunity in southern ruins. Some come to help, others to exploit. You can't always tell which is which. One man hands out loans and Bibles in equal measure. Another buys up scorched farmland for pennies. Either way, the South isn't theirs anymore, and that burns as just as much as the defeat. You walk through New Orleans and hear jazz for the first time, ragged, rising from alleys and back streets like smoke from a new fire. Something is being born as something else dies. At night, under a crescent moon, you listen to two men argue by a campfire. One says, "We should have never seceded." The other spits into the dirt. "We had no choice." You leave before they reach agreement. They won't. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. You visit a cemetery with no names on the stones, just markers. Row after row, women in black leave flowers, tears, and sometimes letters. One says, "You were too young." Another, "We will rebuild." A third reads simply, "Why?" The stars above don't answer. They never do. And so you walk on, into the ruins of a world that built itself on pride, cotton, and bondage. A world that danced under chandeliers while children cried in the fields. A world that sang about honor while shackles rusted in the sun. A world that burned and now must reckon with the smoke. You pass a burned crossroads, its sign missing, and wonder what direction anything points to now.
So now you rest. Let your breath ease. The battles are over, at least for tonight. The campfires have gone cold, the rifles stacked, the uniforms folded away. You've walked through a world that believed it could never fall until it did. A world full of contradictions, beauty and cruelty, grace and grief, pride and pain. Let your eyes soften as you remember the old oak trees heavy with moss, the hush of church songs in the distance, the clink of glasses at vanished parties, the quiet rebellion of whispered prayers in midnight cabins. The South, in all its layered truth, drifts behind you now like a river mist. Its stories, like this one, live on in the dust, in the silence, in the questions we still ask. Not all of them have answers. Not all of them should. You've seen more than grand columns and tattered flags. You've seen a whole belief system crack and crumble, revealing both its cruelty and its human cost. And yet, from the ashes, something new begins, a road not yet paved, a tune not yet finished, a hope not yet spoken aloud. So breathe slowly. Sink into that softness around your chest. Let the hush wrap around you like those faded quilts from a time before. No more footsteps, no more gunfire, just stars blinking overhead and the hum of night insects in the grass. Tomorrow, the story continues. But tonight, you're safe, you're still, and you're home.